That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The cold Hereford rain fell in a steady drizzle, turning the parade square at Credenhill into a slick mosaic of puddles that reflected the grey sky above. It was just past 600 hours, and the 22nd Special Air Service Regiment's training ground hummed with the muted efficiency of a new day. Lads from the support companies, engineers, signals, and logistics troops formed up in their olive-drab uniforms, rifles slung across their chests, boots polished to a dull gleam despite the weather. The air carried the sharp tang of wet earth and gun oil, mingling with the faint, acrid bite of cordite from the overnight range sessions that never truly paused in a place like this. Sergeant Major Ellis stood at the front, his posture ramrod straight, the peak of his beret casting a shadow over eyes that had seen more than 2 decades of service. He was a stocky man from the West Midlands, his voice a gravelly bark honed by years of drill instruction. "Right, you lot," he called out, the words slicing through the patter of rain. "Fall in properly. This isn't a holiday camp. Privates, check your spacing. Lance corporals, eyes front. No gawking at the clouds." The ranks shuffled into line, the scrape of boots on concrete echoing like distant thunder. Among them was Corporal Daniel Hale, positioned 3rd from the end in the 2nd row. At 34, Hale was unremarkable in the sea of young faces. Medium build, close-cropped dark hair greying at the temples, a faint scar tracing his jawline from some long-forgotten scrape. He moved with the quiet precision of a man who knew his drills by rote, his gaze fixed on a point just beyond the sergeant's shoulder. No flourish, no excess energy, just competence, the sort that blended into the background like camouflage in the Welsh hills. Hale had been at Credenhill for 18 months, attached to the signals squadron after a transfer from a line infantry battalion in Aldershot. Whispers followed him, the kind that circulated in the mess hall over mugs of stewed tea. Quiet one, that Hale, doesn't say much, probably hiding from something. The younger privates ribbed him lightly during kit inspections, nothing vicious, just the casual jabs of men testing boundaries. "Oi, Corp, you ever fire a shot that wasn't at a paper target?" One had quipped the week before, earning a ripple of chuckles. Hale had only nodded, lips pressed into a thin line, and continued folding his webbing with methodical care. This morning, as the rain seeped through collar and cuffs, the routine felt heavier than usual. The squadron was preparing for a live-fire exercise on the nearby ranges, a standard affair to sharpen marksmanship before the real work of selection week loomed. Ellis paced the front, his boots leaving shallow imprints in the softening ground. "Listen in," he said, voice steady against the downpour. "We'll kit up in 10. Snipers to the high ground. Hale, you're on observation with Lance Corporal Reed. Keep your heads down and your reports clean. No heroics. We do this by the book." A murmur rippled through the ranks at Hale's name. Reed, a lanky 22-year-old from Manchester with a reputation for loose talk, shot him a sideways glance. "Observation, eh? Hope you don't nod off up there, Corp. Last time you were on watch, I swear you were dreaming of tea and biscuits." The line tittered again, the sound muffled by the rain. Hale didn't react, his face impassive, hands clasped behind his back in the at-ease position. But inside, the familiar knot tightened in his chest, a quiet burn of endurance, the weight of words unspoken. The group broke to collect gear from the armory sheds, the clatter of metal and canvas filling the air. Hale shouldered his pack, the straps biting into damp shoulders, and fell in step with the others trudging toward the range access road. Credenhill's perimeter fence loomed in the mist, topped with razor wire that glinted dully. Beyond it, the Brecon beacons rose like silent sentinels, their peaks shrouded in cloud. This was the regiment's heartland, where quiet professionalism wasn't just taught, it was breathed, from the first roll call to the last stand down. As they loaded into the back of a Land Rover, engines rumbling to life with a throaty growl, Reed leaned in close. "Seriously, Hale, you ever been up against the real thing? Or is it all theory in that head of yours?" The question hung, laced with the unspoken challenge that came with youth and impatience. Hale met his eyes for a brief moment, the contact steady but revealing nothing. "Theories kept me alive so far," he replied, his voice low and even, carrying the clipped vowels of southern England. No edge, no defensiveness, just fact. The vehicle jolted over the rutted track, splashing through puddles that sprayed up like shrapnel. Sergeant Ellis rode up front, barking directions to the driver, a wiry private who gripped the wheel with white-knuckled focus. The rain intensified, drumming on the canvas roof, turning conversation to murmurs. Hale stared out at the passing hedgerows, his mind drifting to the high ground ahead. The sniper's nest, concealed in gorse and rock, where visibility would be key and silence absolute. By 0700 they reached the range's forward observation post, a low earth berm overlooking the firing lanes. The air here was colder, sharper, carrying the faint echo of suppressed pops from distant practice. Hale and Reed dismounted, scrambling up the slope with packs balanced. At the crest, they dropped prone, binos in hand, scanning the targets 500 meters out, silhouettes of plywood and straw swaying faintly in the wind. "Right," Reed said, settling in beside him, his breath fogging the lens before he wiped it clear. "You take the left sector, I'll cover right, and try not to miss the bleedin' obvious, yeah?" Another jab delivered with a half grin, as if to lighten the load of the morning's monotony. Hale adjusted his position, the wet soil cold against his elbows, and raised the binoculars. The world narrowed to grids and angles, the rain blurring the edges. Below, the main body of the squadron fanned out, rifles cracking in controlled bursts. Discipline held, as it always did, orders followed, positions maintained. But in that moment, as a gust whipped across the hill, Hale felt the subtle shift, the crack in the routine that no one else seemed to notice. A hesitation in the line, perhaps, or the way Ellis's gaze lingered on the horizon. It was nothing yet, just the quiet tension of a day unfolding, boots echoing in memory across the drill square back at base. But Hale knew, in the reserved core of him, that mornings like this could pivot on the smallest defiance, a shot taken, a silence broken. The rain fell on indifferent as the first real round echoed through the valley. The range settled into its rhythm as the morning wore on, the rain easing to a fine mist that clung to skin and equipment, like a persistent fog. Below the observation post, the squadron moved with the precision of long practice, sections advancing in bounds, covering fire laid down in crisp, overlapping patterns. Sergeant Major Ellis directed from the command mound, his voice carrying clear over the controlled bursts of SA-80 rifles, each shot a sharp punctuation in the damp air. "Section 1, advance. Watch your flanks. Keep it tight." Privates and lance corporals responded without hesitation, their movements economical, boots sinking into the sodden turf as they low-crawled forward, faces pressed low against the chill. Corporal Hale lay prone beside Lance Corporal Reed, the binoculars steady in his gloved hands, his body a still outline against the gorse. He logged the positions methodically. Target hits, misses, the subtle drift of rounds influenced by the crosswind. No commentary, no flourish, just the quiet tally of a man who had watched such exercises unfold 100 times before. Reed, by contrast, fidgeted slightly, shifting his weight to ease the pressure on his knees, his own binos dipping now and then as he scanned with less focus. "Bloody weather," he muttered, wiping condensation from the lens with his cuff. "Makes everything twice as hard. You reckon Ellis is timing us for errors today? He's got that look." Hale didn't turn, his eye fixed on the left sector where a private, young, eager from the look of his over-enthusiastic fire, clipped the edge of a silhouette at 400 meters. "Wind's holding at 5 knots from the west," Hale replied evenly, his voice barely rising above the distant reports. "Adjust elevation by 2 clicks. He'll correct on the next string." It was advice offered without insistence, the words slipping out as fact, not command. Reed snorted softly, a sound lost in the wind. "Always the teacher, eh, Corp? Bet you were top of the class back at Pirbright, or was it all book smarts from some desk job?" The jab landed lightly, the kind of ribbing that passed for camaraderie in the ranks. But Hale felt its familiar weight. He had heard variations on it since arriving at Cretenhill, the signals attachment painting him as the outsider, the one who handled comms and wires rather than the sharp end. No one questioned his competence outright. His reports were always spot on, his kit impeccable, But the undercurrent lingered, a subtle underestimation born of his reserve. He adjusted the focus on his binos, noting the private's follow-up shot. Clean center mass. Better, he said simply, marking it in his notepad with a stub of pencil, the lead smudging slightly in the damp. Down on the range, the drill evolved into the sniper phase, a segment reserved for those with the steadier hands and sharper eyes. Ellis signaled the shift with a raised arm, his silhouette stark against the graying horizon. Snipers, to your hides. Observation. Maintain overwatch. Report deviations. The main body peeled back to covered positions, leaving designated marksmen to belly crawl to their spots amid the scattered boulders and heather. Among them was Private Jenkins, a wiry lad from the squadron's reconnaissance troop, selected for this rotation despite his relative inexperience. He carried the L115A3 rifle with a reverence that bordered on nerves, its long barrel slung low as he moved. Hale tracked Jenkins's progress through the glasses, the private's form blending into the terrain with reasonable stealth. "He's in position," Hale radioed back to the command post, his tone clipped and neutral, the handset cold against his ear. "Bearing 240. Range confirmed at 600. Wind steady." The response crackled through, Ellis's voice approving but terse. "Copy that, Hale. Keep it coming." Reed, monitoring his sector, chuckled under his breath. 600? Jenkins will be lucky to hit the backstop. You ever take a shot like that, Corp, or do you just watch from the cheap seats? Hale's jaw tightened imperceptibly, the scar along it pulling with the motion, but his reply remained measured. "Watching's half the skill, saves lives." He didn't elaborate, didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he swept the binos across the broader field, catching the faint glint of another sniper team's optic in the distance, a visiting element from the regular army, attached for cross-training. They were a small unit, 4 men in subdued camo, moving with an economy that spoke of higher standards. No chatter, no wasted motion. Hale noted their positions automatically, filing it away as routine. The first sniper shots rang out, suppressed cracks that echoed faintly off the beacon's slopes. Jenkins fired his string. 3 rounds, 2 hits, 1 wide. Reed reported it with a hint of smugness. Missed the mark. Wind caught him. Hale logged his own observations without comment, but as Jenkins reset, something shifted in the private's posture. A hurried adjustment, perhaps frustration boiling over. On the next pull, the shot deviated sharply, the round kicking up dirt well short of the target. Ellis's voice barked over the net. "Cease fire! Jenkins, report to me!" What the hell was that? The range fell quiet, save for the patter of residual mist and the distant call of a crow. Jenkins scrambled from his hide, rifle in hand, his face flushed as he double-timed to the command mound. The squadron watched from their positions, a murmur of speculation rippling through the ranks. Reed lowered his binos, grinning sidelong at Hale. "Told you. Lad's all enthusiasm, no finesse. You could probably school him blindfolded, eh? Silent sniper Hale, they should call you." Hale ignored the prod, his focus on the unfolding scene below. Ellis was dressing Jenkins down, not shouting, but with that measured intensity that cut deeper than volume. "Discipline, Private. 1 lapse, and it's not just your arse, it's the team." Jenkins stood at attention, shoulders squared, the rain tracing rivulets down his helmet. Around them, the base routines asserted themselves. A logistics truck rumbling past with fresh ammo crates, the faint scent of hot metal from spent casings wafting up the slope. This was Credden Hill's order, hierarchy etched into every action, from the lowliest private to the sergeant major's unyielding gaze. As Jenkins returned to his position, chastened but resolute, Hale felt the knot in his chest ease fractionally. He had seen such corrections before, in other units, other mornings much like this. But there was a restraint in it all, a British understatement that demanded competence without fanfare. Reed stretched, cracking his neck. "Right, back to it. Your turn to call the next string, Corp. Don't cock it up." Hale nodded once, raising the binos again, the world sharpening into focus. The visiting unit shifted subtly in his peripheral vision, one of their number pausing as if appraising the range's flow. Nothing more, just the quiet pulse of the day. By midday, the exercise wrapped its first phase. the squadron regrouping for a brief stand-easy near the access road. Mugs of char were passed around from a steaming urn in the back of a rover, the steam rising like ghosts in the chill. Hale accepted his without a word, sipping the strong brew while leaning against a fence post, his pack at his feet. The others clustered in loose groups, recounting the morning's hits and misses with dry humour. Jenkins nearly plugged the CO's hat, one lance corporal quipped, earning a bark of laughter. Reed joined in, but his glance flicked back to Hale. "What about you, Corp? Got any war stories to liven this up?" Hale met his eyes steadily, the mug warm in his hands. "Plenty," he said quietly, the word hanging for a beat before he turned away, gaze on the mist-shrouded hills. No more was said, the moment dissolving into the routines of kit checks and movement orders. Ellis called them to fall in, boots scraping as the line reformed, the parade squares echo alive even here on the range. Order reasserted, tensions banked, the day pressed on, subtle, internal, unyielding. The afternoon dragged into a grey haze as the squadron trudged back from the range, the Land Rovers churning mud along the access track. Credden Hill's training grounds lay behind them now, the echoes of gunfire fading into the persistent drizzle that had returned with midday. Corporal Hale walked at the rear of his section, pack slung low, the weight of damp gear pulling at his shoulders. His boots struck the gravel with measured rhythm, each step a silent affirmation of the morning's discipline. Reed fell in beside him, still buzzing from the exercise, his voice cutting through the low hum of conversation. Fair play to Jenkins, though, bouncing back like that. But you, Corp, you were glued to those binos like they held the secrets of the universe. What were you really seeing out there? Hale kept his gaze forward, the mist beating on his lashes. The job, he replied, tone flat as the surrounding fields. No invitation for more, but Reed pressed on, as lads like him often did, mistaking silence for weakness. "Come on, mate. You've got that look, like you've seen ghosts in the crosshairs. Or is it just the rain playing tricks?" A few heads turned, the section's pace slowing as they neared the mess hall block, its squat concrete facade rising from the base's central square like a bunker from the Welsh Wars. Inside, the air shifted from chill dampness to the close warmth of boiled cabbage and strong tea, the scent mingling with the faint polish of freshly mopped floors. The squadron filed in orderly, queuing at the serving hatch where a cook in a stained apron ladled out plates of shepherd's pie and peas. Trays clattered softly, the line moving with the unhurried efficiency of men who knew hunger waited for no one but protocol. Hale took his tray, metal heavy with portions, and balanced it on one arm, navigating the benches where ranks settled by seniority, sergeants at the head tables, privates filling the ends. He chose a spot midway down, away from the clusters of laughter, sliding onto the bench with his back to the wall. The pie steamed faintly, a small comfort against the day's soak. Reed dropped his tray opposite, flanked by two privates from the signals troop. Lads named Baxter and Cole, both fresh from basic, their faces still carrying the raw edges of youth. "Mind if we join the mystery man?" Reed said, not waiting for an answer as he dug in. Baxter, a stocky Geordie with a perpetual smirk, leaned forward. "Heard you called that wind spot on this morning, Corp. Saved Jenkins a proper bollocking. You got eyes like a hawk or what?" Hale forked a mouthful, chewing slowly before responding. "Just observation." The word hung, simple and sufficient, but Cole, slighter with the quick wit of a Londoner, piped up, his fork gesturing vaguely. "Observation, eh? That's your specialty, innit? Sitting back, watching the world go by. Bet you could spot a sparrow at a mile, but when it comes to the real drill—" He trailed off with a grin, the implication clear, all theory, no action. The table chuckled, a low ripple that drew glances from nearby benches. Reed joined in, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Yeah, Corp. You ever pull a trigger under pressure? Or is it all maps and radios for you?" The question landed heavier now, in the confines of the mess, where voices carried and hierarchies sharpened. Hale's fork paused mid-air, the peas cooling on the tines. He met Reed's eyes steadily, the contact brief but unyielding, then resumed eating. Silence as his shield, as always, the reserved core that had carried him through transfers and postings, from Aldershot's bustling yards to this regiment outpost. But the lads weren't done. Baxter nudged Cole, emboldened by the lack of pushback. "Come on, Hale, spill it. What's the scar from? Shaving accident in the signals hut?" Laughter swelled, drawing Sergeant Ellis's eye from across the room, though he said nothing, his focus on his own plate. Hale set his fork down, the metal clinking softly against the tray. "Old habit," he said quietly, the words barely audible over the din. It was enough to fuel them. Cole reached across, clapping Hale's shoulder a touch too firmly, his hand lingering on the sleeve of Hale's damp jacket. "Lighten up, Corp. We're only taking the piss. No harm in a bit of banter, yeah?" Hale shifted slightly, dislodging the hand without comment, but as he did, his tray tipped, just a fraction, caught by the bench's edge. The plate slid, shepherd's pie spilling across the table in a messy arc, gravy splattering Reed's sleeve and Cole's lap. Gasps turned to guffaws, the section erupting as trays were shoved back to avoid the mess. "Bloody hell, Hale! You trying to start a food fight?" Reed jumped up, brushing at his uniform, his face reddening, not from anger, but the sudden spotlight. Baxter howled, pounding the table. "Clumsy as a civvy, Corp. You need lessons in tray duty." The noise drew more eyes, lance corporals from adjacent tables craning necks, a private muttering "what a plonker" under his breath. Hale rose methodically, grabbing a cloth from the end of the bench to mop the spill, his movements precise despite the chaos. No apology, no outburst, just the quiet dignity of containment, wiping the table clean while the laughter peaked. Ellis glanced over again, his brow furrowing, but he barked no order. Mess hall infractions were beneath his immediate concern, left to the natural correction of the ranks. Reed, still dabbing at his sleeve, leaned in with a mock-serious tone. "Oi, Corp, that your idea of payback? Next time aim for the pie, not me." The table roared anew, Cole slapping his knee, the humiliation public now, etched into the afternoon's routine. Hale finished cleaning, stacking the soiled plate on his tray, and carried it to the hatch without a word. His posture remained straight, boots echoing faintly on the lino floor, the scar along his jaw catching the harsh fluorescent light. Inside, the knot twisted tighter, a burn of injustice, not from the spill itself, but the orchestrated undercurrent, the way silence invited the jabs to land unchecked. Outside the mess, the drizzle had thickened to rain, pattering against the windows as the squadron filtered back to quarters for afternoon briefings. Hale paused at the door, rain sheeting down the glass, blurring the parade square beyond. Reed and the others brushed past, still chuckling, one calling after him, "Watch your step." "Silent, Corp. Don't want to slip on your own gravy." The door swung shut behind them, leaving Hale alone for a moment, his reflection superimposed on the wet world outside. He straightened his collar, the fabric sodden, and stepped into the downpour, the cold seeping through once more. Back in the signals block, the section settled into kit maintenance, rifles stripped. Webbing aired out on racks that lined the walls. The air smelled of oil and damp wool, the low murmur of voices resuming as boots dried by the radiators. Hale worked at his station, a corner bench cluttered with notebooks and a half-disassembled radio, his hands moving with the same quiet competence. Reed sauntered over, tray incident apparently forgotten in the rhythm of tasks. "All right, Corp. No hard feelings about lunch, just keeping things lively." He clapped Hale's wrist this time, gripping the cuff of his shirt as if to emphasize the camaraderie, pulling it slightly to inspect the seam. "This kit's seen better days. You treat it like an old mate?" Hale withdrew his hand steadily. No force, just withdrawal, and resumed oiling the bolt carrier. "It holds," he said, voice low, eyes on the task. The grip had been casual, but it lingered in his mind. The casual presumption, the way it underscored the mockery. Across the room, Baxter and Cole whispered, glances flicking Hale's way, the spill already morphing into squadron lore. The clumsy corporal, the butt of the afternoon. Ellis entered then, clipboard in hand, calling for attention. "Briefing in 5. Dry your kit and fall in. No slacking." His gaze swept the room, pausing fractionally on Hale, but moved on without remark. As the section formed up, Hale stood at his place, posture impeccable, the rain's chill still clinging to his bones. The violation sat internal, a subtle fracture in the order, a test of restraint amid the rigid lines of British service. No outburst, No demand for respect, just the endurance of silence, waiting for the moment when observation turned to revelation. The afternoon pressed on, routines unbroken, the parade square waiting beyond the door with its echoing boots and unyielding concrete. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. The briefing room in the signals block was a stark affair, its walls lined with faded maps of the Welsh borders and corkboards pinned with faded range schedules. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp wool and machine oil, the radiators humming faintly against the encroaching chill of the afternoon. Corporal Hale stood in his assigned spot at the rear of the formation, hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed on the worn linoleum floor. The section had fallen in promptly at Sergeant Major Ellis's command, boots aligned in precise rows, the faint drip of rainwater from jacket hems pooling at their feet. Ellis paced the front, his voice a steady cadence as he outlined the evening's tasks. Equipment audits followed by a night navigation drill on the perimeter trails. "Pay attention," Ellis said, his eyes sweeping the ranks like a searchlight. "No room for complacency. The regiment doesn't tolerate it, neither do I." The words landed with the weight of routine, the squadron nodding in unison, their postures rigid under the fluorescent glare. Reed stood 2 places to Hale's left, his earlier banter subdued now, though a faint smirk lingered as he shifted his weight. Baxter and Cole exchanged a glance, the mess hall incident still fresh in their expressions, a subtle undercurrent of amusement that prickled at Hale's periphery. He ignored it, his breathing even, the scar along his jaw a cool line against his skin. The door at the rear creaked open midway through Ellis's rundown, admitting a gust of rain-laced air that stirred the maps on the walls. No one turned immediately. Discipline held. But Hale caught the shift in the room's rhythm, a subtle tension threading through the ranks. Ellis paused, his clipboard lowering fractionally. "Carry on," came a voice from the doorway, low and measured, carrying the unmistakable timbre of authority tempered by experience. It wasn't a command, merely an observation, but Ellis nodded once, sharply, and resumed. The newcomers were 4 in number, their silhouettes framed against the grey light outside. Men in subdued combat dress, berets tucked under arms, faces weathered by service that spoke louder than insignia. They were from the SAS proper, selection graduates attached to Hereford for a joint evaluation, their presence announced only that morning via a terse signals brief. Leading them was Staff Sergeant Harlan, a lean figure in his mid-40s, his dark hair cropped close, eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. He moved with the economy of a man who conserved energy for the essential, his boots leaving faint tracks of mud on the threshold. Beside him 3 others, corporals in the regiment's mould, silent and watchful, their packs slung low as if weight were an afterthought. They took positions along the side wall, not integrating but observing, their stillness a contrast to the squadron's ordered fidget. Harlan's gaze swept the room once, methodically, lingering nowhere, yet Hale felt it brush past. A cool appraisal that settled briefly on the rear ranks. No words passed among the visitors. They stood as one, arms folded loosely, the rain drumming steadily on the roof above like a muffled heartbeat. Ellis wrapped the briefing with a curt, "Dismissed," and the section broke, moving to their stations with the clatter of benches and the rustle of webbing. Hale turned to his bench, resuming the disassembly of his radio unit, fingers working the screws with practiced care. The components gleamed dully under the light, transmitters, antennas, the intricate wiring that bound signals to survival. Reed passed close, collecting his own gear, and muttered under his breath, "Fancy guests, bet they're here to show us how it's really done." Baxter chuckled from across the room, but Hale kept his focus, the tool in his hand turning smoothly. The visitors dispersed minimally. 2 of Harlan's team drifted to the range maps, tracing lines with gloved fingers, while the 3rd inspected a rack of binoculars, his touchlight almost reverent. Harlan remained by the door for a moment, then approached Ellis at the front, their conversation a low murmur. Logistics, no doubt, the dry exchange of operational details, but as Hale calibrated the radio's frequency dial, adjusting for the damp's interference, he sensed Harlan's attention shift. Not overt, a glance perhaps caught in the reflection of a polished toolkit. Hale's sleeve had ridden up slightly during the work, exposing the inner forearm, a faint tattoo, inked in black and faded by time. depicting a winged dagger encircled by a laurel. The SAS crest, rendered small and discreet, as if hidden from casual view. Harlan's posture altered imperceptibly, a straightening of the shoulders, the subtle tilt of his head. He didn't approach, didn't speak. Instead, he watched as Hale secured the panel, the corporal's hands moving with an assurance that betrayed deeper familiarity. Not the rote motions of a signals attachment, but the precise ritual of one who had handled such gear in shadows under fire. The room's hum continued, privates oiling rifles, lance corporals folding maps, the rain's patter a constant underscore. Reed, oblivious, bantered with Cole about the navigation drill. "Hope you brought your compass, lad, or you'll end up in Brecon Town pub." Laughter rippled, but Harlan's eyes narrowed fractionally, noting Hale's isolation, the way he worked alone, unhurried. Minutes passed, the block settling into the afternoon's labor. One of Harlan's corporals, a broad-shouldered man named Sykes by the name tape, moved closer to the benches, ostensibly checking a communal logbook. His gaze fell on Hale's station, pausing on the notepad beside the radio. Entries in tight script, grids and bearings from the morning's range, annotated with wind vectors and corrections that spoke of sniper overwatch experience. Sykes didn't touch it, but his stillness deepened, a quiet recognition flickering in his expression. He exchanged a glance with another team member across the room, no nod, no signal, just the shared understanding of men who knew the signs. Ellis called a halt to the maintenance, directing the section to prepare for the navigation brief outside. The squadron filed toward the door, packs shouldered, the air thickening with the scent of wet earth as it swung open. Hale fell in at the rear, his tattoo concealed once more beneath the cuff, the moment passing unmarked by the others. But as they stepped into the drizzle-swept square, Harlan lingered at the threshold, his position allowing a clear view of Hale's gait. The balanced stride, economical and alert, hinting at patrols in far harsher terrains than Credenhill's trails. Outside, the parade square stretched under a leaden sky, puddles mirroring the low clouds, the concrete slick and unforgiving. Ellis formed them up swiftly, the ranks snapping to attention with boots striking in unison, the echo sharp against the bases encircling barracks. Harlan and his team took a flank position, observers rather than participants, their presence a subtle pressure on the formation. The navigation brief began, Ellis outlining routes through the fog-shrouded hills, emphasizing pace counts and dead reckoning. "No shortcuts," he intoned, voice carrying over the rain. "The land doesn't forgive errors." Hale absorbed it silently, his eyes tracing the sketched paths on Ellis's whiteboard, committing them to memory with the ease of long habit. Reed, beside him, whispered a quip about getting lost in the mist, but Hale's focus held steady. Across the square, Harlan watched, not Hale directly, but the collective, his stillness a canvas for observation. Yet in that reserved gaze, details accumulated, the way Hale's posture adjusted to the wind without conscious thought, the faint callus on his trigger finger visible as he clasped his hands, the understated vigilance that set him apart from the younger rank's eager shuffle. As the brief concluded, and the section dispersed to collect compasses and torches from the stores, Sykes approached Harlan under the eaves of the block, rain sheeting off the gutter above. No words were exchanged. Sykes merely tilted his head toward Hale's retreating figure, a single gesture laden with implication. Harlan's response was a fractional nod, his expression unchanging, the quiet professionalism of the regiment asserting itself in the unspoken. They had seen such men before, shadows from classified briefs, echoes of operations in the sands of Iraq or the mountains of Afghanistan, where a sniper's shot decided fates in silence. The afternoon waned, the drizzle persisting as the squadron moved out in pairs for the navigation start points. Hale paired with a private from logistics, a quiet lad named Thorne, who said little beyond lead-on corp. They trudged toward the perimeter fence, the mud sucking at their boots, the beacons looming indistinct in the haze. Behind them, Harlan's team remained, their observation continuing from the square's edge, still internal, a growing certainty forming in the spaces between words. No questions yet, no revelations, just the subtle weave of recognition threading through the rigid order of the day. The rain fell on, cold and indifferent, as the hidden past began to surface, one glance at a time. The navigation drill unfolded under a deepening twilight, the drizzle giving way to a chill wind that swept across the perimeter trails like a warning from the beacons themselves. Credon Hill's outer paths wound through sodden gorse and rocky outcrops, the ground treacherous with hidden ruts and slick granite, demanding the full measure of a soldier's focus. The squadron had split into pairs, each tasked with plotting a course to a series of checkpoints marked by faint chemlights buried in the undergrowth. Sergeant Major Ellis coordinated from a mobile command post near the fence line, his radio crackling with position reports, the clipped exchanges a lifeline in the gathering gloom. Corporal Hale moved steadily with Private Thorne at his side, the pair navigating by compass and pace count, their torches dim to red filters that cast bloody shadows on the map. Hale's steps were measured, his eyes scanning the contours of the land, with an instinct honed beyond the signal syllabus, reading the lie of the hill, anticipating the shift in elevation that could throw a reckoning off by meters. Thorne, a solid lad from the logistics troop, with hands more accustomed to crates than contours, followed without question, his breath coming in even puffs. "Steady bearing, Corp," Hale murmured, adjusting their heading by 2 degrees as the wind quartered in. No elaboration, just the quiet assurance that kept them on track. Behind them, in the fading light of the square, Staff Sergeant Harlan and his team maintained their vigil, positioned at the trailhead with binoculars trained on the departing pairs. Harlan's expression remained impassive, the lines around his eyes etched deeper by the low sun's slant, but his stillness betrayed the accumulation of observations. Hale's gait, the way he handled the compass without flourish, the subtle economy of motion that spoke of patrols in far deadlier terrain. Sykes, his second, stood a pace removed, murmuring a single word, "Confirmed," as the squadron vanished into the mist. No more needed saying. The pieces aligned, drawing from classified files and half-remembered briefings, the kind that circulated only within the regiment's inner circles. The drill progressed methodically, reports filtering back via handheld sets. Checkpoint Bravo, Pair 7 on station. Ellis acknowledged each with a terse copy, his silhouette stark against the command rover's headlights. Reed and Baxter, paired together, hit a snag midway, their voices crackling with frustration over a misread grid. Winds playing havoc, lost 10 degrees east. Laughter threaded the net from other pairs, the dry humor of men who knew the land's indifference, but Hale's report came clean. Checkpoint Charlie, Pair 12, time on target. Ellis's response held a fractional pause, as if noting the precision, but the night pressed on, the wind rising to whip the gorse into whispers. It was nearing 2,000 hours when the complication arose, a simulated enemy contact injected into the exercise by Ellis's design, to test reaction under fatigue. Flares popped in the distance, casting erratic orange glows across the trails, and the net lit up with orders. All pairs, overwatch positions, assume sniper threat from high ground, report sightings. The squadron dropped low, bellies to the mud, scanning the ridgeline where shadows pooled like ink. Thorne froze beside Hale, his rifle up but unsteady, the private's eyes wide in the red light. "Corp, that's our sector. Nothing but rock up there." Hale didn't respond immediately. He had already shifted. Prone behind a low boulder, his SA-80 unslung and optic glassed, the reticle sweeping the crest with surgical calm. The wind tugged at his collar, carrying the faint tang of peat and cordite from the flares, but his breathing held even, the world narrowing to angles and breath-holds. Below, the squadron fanned into defensive arcs, Reed's voice barking position calls nearby. "Covering left. Eyes on the ridge." Tension coiled in the air, subtle but electric, the rigid hierarchy bending to the drill's demands. Then a glint, faint, metallic, betraying an enemy spotter embedded in the exercise, one of Ellis's staff playing the role from a concealed nest. The figure was partial, just a shoulder and elbow exposed against the skyline, but enough for a trained eye. Hale exhaled slowly, adjusting for the crosswind's bite. 8 knots now, gusting left. His finger curled on the trigger, the shot a suppressed whisper that cracked once, clean, the round clipping the spotter's tag at 700 meters, the flare of impact visible even in the murk. The net erupted. "Hit confirmed, sniper down, who took that?" Ellis's voice cut through, sharp but controlled. "Report your firer." Reed's pair scanned futilely, Baxter muttering curses into the static. From the command post, Harlan's team had relocated to an elevated vantage, their own optics locked on the action. Harlan lowered his binoculars fractionally, his posture unchanging. But a subtle rigidity entered his frame as the shot's origin traced back. The public reckoning brewed in that instant, the squadron's eyes turning toward the sectors, whispers rippling through the prone lines. Hale logged the engagement in his notepad, the pencil's scratch lost in the wind, Thorne gaping beside him. "Bloody hell, Corp. That was you, from here." No time for reply. Ellis ordered a rally point, the pairs converging on the square under torchlight, boots slogging through the churned path. As they reformed, mud-streaked and wind-lashed, Harlan stepped forward from the shadows, his team flanking him like extensions of his will. The squadron fell silent, sensing the shift. These weren't mere observers now, but arbiters in the night's unfolding. Ellis nodded to Harlan, deference in the gesture. "Staff Sergeant, your thoughts on the drill?" Harlan's gaze swept the ranks, settling on Hale with the weight of recognition, not surprise. He moved closer, boots deliberate on the wet concrete, stopping a pace from the formation's rear. The air thickened, the rain's patter the only sound, as Harlan's voice emerged low, addressed to the group but piercing as a blade. "Who took that shot?" The question hung, echoing the title of the moment, but before Reed or Baxter could claim credit, Harlan's eyes locked on Hale, freezing mid-breath. The staff sergeant didn't raise his voice, didn't gesture. Instead, he stood at attention, the salute rising crisp and unbidden. A winged dagger's honor, reserved for brothers in the shadows. The base froze, Ellis's clipboard lowering, Reed's smirk vanishing, the private's murmurs dying into awe. Harlan's words followed, quiet but carrying to every ear. "That was no signals attachments work. Corporal Hale, Ghost One, you just reminded us all why the regiment owes you." The name, Ghost One, landed like a classified thunderclap, the call sign from a Helmand operation 5 years buried, where Hale's overwatch had silenced an insurgent nest, saving Harlan's patrol in the dead of night. The tattoo, the scar, the shot, they aligned now, public and transformative. Shame rippled through the ranks, Reed's face paling, Baxter averting his eyes, the mockery of the mess hall curdling into regret. Hale met Harlan's gaze steadily, no triumph in his posture, just the reserved nod of shared silence. The wind howled on, but respect rose in its wake, the hierarchy bending not to drama, but to the quiet truth of moral courage unveiled. Ellis straightened, the squadron holding formation as the revelation settled, a pivot in the cold Hereford night. The square held its breath in the wake of Harlan's salute, the wind slicing through the formation like a bayonet's edge. Corporal Hale stood unmoving at the rear, his SA-80 still slung low across his chest, mud caking the hems of his trousers. The red glow from the flares had faded, leaving only the harsh beams of the command rover's headlights to carve stark shadows across the ranks. Sergeant Major Ellis's clipboard dangled forgotten at his side, the plastic edge tapping faintly against his thigh in the gusts. No one spoke. The squadron's discipline, so rigidly enforced through drills and briefings, now manifested in a profound stillness, the kind that amplified the rain's patter on concrete and the distant rumble of thunder over the beacons. Harlan lowered his hand slowly, the salute's crisp snap echoing in memory, his eyes locked on Hale's with the unyielding focus of shared history. "Ghost One," he repeated, the call sign emerging not as accusation, but affirmation, its weight pulling the air taut. The name evoked fragments of classified briefs. Helmand Province, 2018, a night patrol ambushed in the Green Zone's labyrinth of compounds and irrigation ditches. Hale, then a sergeant in a joint task force, had held the high ground alone after his spotter fell. His L-115A3 whispering death across 700 meters of moonless dark. 3 insurgents dropped before they could loose a single RPG, Harlan's team extracting under that cover, lives owed in the silence of Overwatch. The regiment's files marked it as routine, but those who walked the wire knew the cost. The scar on Hale's jaw from shrapnel graze, the tattoo inked in a forward operating base as a private vow, never flaunted, always concealed. Reed, 2 paces ahead in the line, shifted his weight. His earlier smirk evaporated into pallor. His rifle felt heavier now, the sling biting into his shoulder as he stared at the ground, the mess hall's banter replaying in his mind like a misfired round. The tray spill, the wrist grip, the jabs about silent sniper hail, they curdled into something sharper, a shame that spread through his chest like damp rot. Beside him, Baxter's broad frame sagged fractionally, his eyes flicking to Cole, who stood rigid, the Londoner's quick wit silenced for the first time that day. The privates further up the ranks exchanged no glances. Thorne, Hale's navigation partner, straightened imperceptibly, his earlier awe deepening into quiet reverence. Whispers had circulated before, rumors of Hale's transfer from a line unit, his reticence chalked up to burnout or worse. But this was no rumor. This was revelation, etched in Harlan's stance, the SAS team's collective nod of recognition rippling like a suppressed wave. Ellis cleared his throat, the sound gravelly in the hush, stepping forward to bridge the moment. "Staff Sergeant," he said, voice steady but laced with the deference of one who recognized boundaries crossed. "If there's more to brief—" Harlan shook his head once, the motion economical, his gaze never leaving Hale. "Not here, but the squadron should know. Corporal Hale's not attached by chance. The regiment placed him here to mend after Hellman took its toll. Signals work keeps the hands busy, the mind sharp. But tonight's shot? That's the man who pulled us from the fire." The words landed without volume, yet they carried to the formation's edges, the wind carrying them like smoke signals. No elaboration on the classified details, no mention of the medal pinned in a quiet ceremony at Sterling Lines, or the medical board that sidelined Hale to recovery postings. Just the core, debt acknowledged, past unveiled. The base's rhythm fractured in that instant, the rigid hierarchy yielding to something deeper, more internal. A lance corporal near the front adjusted his beret, the gesture automatic, but his posture shifted, shoulders back, chin lifted in subtle alignment with Hale's unyielding form. Sykes, Harlan's second, unfolded his arms, standing at ease but with eyes that appraised the ranks anew, as if measuring their worth against the quiet legend now exposed. Shame bloomed across the squadron, not the explosive guilt of confrontation, but a reserved undercurrent, expressed in averted gazes and tightened jaws. Reed swallowed audibly, his hand flexing on his rifle sling. The mockery of the afternoon now a weight he carried alone. Cole's face flushed under the headlights, the private's earlier clap on Hale's shoulder twisting into regret, a lesson in presumption, etched without a word. Hale met it all with the same reserve that had defined him, the scar along his jaw catching the light, his expression unchanging, eyes forward, as if the salute were just another order acknowledged. No swell of pride, no demand for redress, just the internal steadiness of a man who had endured worse than banter in the Welsh rains. He nodded once to Harlan, the contact brief, laden with the unspoken pact of the regiment, silence as bond, competence as currency. The staff sergeant returned it, then turned to Ellis. "Carry on with the stand-down. We'll debrief in the morning." With that, Harlan's team peeled away toward the visitors' block, their steps measured, leaving the square to the squadron's processing. Ellis raised his voice then, not in rebuke, but restoration. "Right, you lot. Kit down and debrief in the block. No chatter. Process it quiet." The formation broke with uncharacteristic slowness, boots scraping softly as pairs reformed, the usual post-drill murmurs replaced by a subdued hum. Reed fell in beside Hale as they trudged toward the signals quarters, the distance between them wider now, unspoken. "Corp, I didn't know," he muttered, voice low, eyes on the path. Hale's reply was simple, clipped. "No need. No absolution granted," but the tone carried it. Forward, always forward in the British way. Inside the block, the air warmed with the scent of drying webbing and fresh brewed tea from the urn, but the atmosphere had shifted. Privates like Thorne offered nods as Hale passed, their deference subtle. A held door, a cleared bench at the maintenance stations. Baxter and Cole worked in silence, stripping rifles with renewed focus, the earlier laughter a ghost in the room. Ellis lingered at the door, his gaze on Hale appraising now, not dismissive. "Good work tonight, Corporal," he said, the praise understated, delivered with a fractional incline of the head. Hale acknowledged it with a salute, sharp professional before resuming his station, the radio components laid out once more under the lamps. As the evening wound down, the squadron settled into bunks and corners, the rain easing to a drizzle that tapped the windows like fading applause. Whispers emerged in pockets, not mockery, but murmurs of respect. Ghost One pulled Harlan's lot out. The transformation was quiet, internal, reshaping the ranks without fanfare. Hale lay on his cot later, staring at the ceiling's cracks, the knot in his chest loosening for the first time since Aldershot. No melodrama in the honour, no excess in the reform, just the steady pulse of British discipline, where silent courage earned its due in postures aligned and silences shared. The base slept on, Creddon Hill's concrete unyielding, but the order within had realigned, honour's quiet legacy taking root in the cold Hereford night. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Daniel Hale reach those who still believe in honour. The days following the night drill blurred into a subdued cadence at Creddon Hill, the persistent drizzle of Hereford's autumn weaving through the base like threads in a well-worn uniform. The parade square, still slick from the evening's rain, bore faint scars from the rally, bootprints etched in mud, now hardening under the weak morning sun that pierced the clouds sporadically. Corporal Daniel Hale moved through the routines with the same unassuming precision, his pack shouldered for the morning's equipment inspection, the faint scar along his jaw catching the light as he fell in with the signals squadron. No fanfare marked his passage. The ranks formed up without the casual jabs that had once punctuated roll call, the air carrying only the clipped commands of Sergeant Major Ellis and the distant rumble of a supply truck on the perimeter road. Ellis stood at the front, his beret peaked sharply, voice steady as he called the inspection. "Webbing first, open order. Check your slings, no twists." The squadron responded in unison, movements economical, the scrape of buckles and the rustle of canvas filling the square. Hale positioned himself third from the end, as always, his SA-80 laid out on the ground sheet with components aligned like soldiers at attention. Reed, now paired with Baxter for the drill, avoided direct eye contact, his focus exaggerated on his own kit, fingers working the straps with unusual care. The Lance Corporal's earlier banter had evaporated overnight, replaced by a reserved diligence that spoke volumes in the silence. No quips about silent snipers or observation from the cheap seats, just the quiet application of polish to a rifle bolt, his posture straighter, as if realigning to an invisible standard. Across the formation, the change rippled subtly, internal as the knot of regret Hale had once carried alone. Private Thorne, the logistics lad from the navigation pair, nodded to Hale as they passed during the shift to radio checks, a fractional dip of the chin, respectful without excess, the kind of gesture exchanged in the regiment's quieter corners. Cole and Baxter worked nearby, their whispers confined to task logistics. Pass the oil, steady on the thread. No laughter echoed from their bench, no sidelong glances laced with amusement. The mess hall incident, once fodder for squadron lore, had dissolved into the ether, its memory a private burden they bore without protest. Shame had done its work, not through reprimand, but through the weight of unveiled truth, the call sign Ghost One hanging in the collective mind, like cordite after a shot. Harlan's team had departed at first light the morning after the revelation, their Land Rover vanishing down the mist-shrouded access road toward Hereford's heart. No formal debrief followed. Ellis had handled it in the signals block with a terse memo on joint exercises, the SAS presence logged as routine evaluation. But the undercurrent lingered, a quiet transformation etched into the base's rhythms. During the afternoon's signals drill, simulating encrypted bursts across mock frequencies, Hale demonstrated a frequency hop without instruction, his hands adjusting the dials with the assurance of one who had keyed life-or-death transmissions from Afghan ridges. The instructor, a warrant officer from the comms wing, paused mid-explanation, his eyes narrowing in appraisal. "Spot on, Corporal. Where'd you pick that up?" Hale's reply was even, "Practice." No elaboration, but the warrant officer nodded, the respect implicit in the lack of follow-up. By evening, as the squadron gathered in the mess hall for rations, boiled beef and potatoes steaming under the low ceilings, the shift solidified. Hale took his tray to the same midway bench, the metal warm against his palms, but this time Reed slid in opposite without the flanking privates, his own plate set down carefully. "Mind?" he asked, voice low, the Manchester lilt subdued. Hale shook his head once, forking into the meal without comment. The hall hummed with the usual clatter, cutlery on plates, the murmur of debriefs from the range, but the isolation that had once defined Hale's corner had eased. Thorne joined them unbidden, balancing his tray with a quiet evening corp, his eyes steady. No trace of the ore from the drill. Conversation flowed sparingly. Wind conditions for the next live fire, adjustments to the navigation maps. Reed contributed without prodding, his questions practical. "That hop sequence, how'd you time it?" The deference woven into the phrasing, a subtle realignment of the hierarchy. Ellis dined at the head table, his gaze sweeping the room periodically, but now it lingered on Hale's group with measured approval. The sergeant major's nod to a passing lance corporal carrying an unspoken directive. Observe, learn. The mockery that had once tested boundaries had ceased, not through edict, but organic correction, the revelation's gravity pulling the ranks into quieter orbits. Whispers, when they occurred, had transformed. In the kit rooms, privates like Jenkins murmured of the shot's precision, not as legend spun for laughs, but as fact absorbed into the squadron's fabric. "Saved the drill and Harlan's memory of it," one said to another, voices hushed over oil rags, the tattoo's glimpse now a symbol of concealed depth rather than oddity. Hale felt the change internally, a loosening of the chest's tension, though he betrayed none of it in posture or expression. His evenings stretched into solitary walks along the perimeter fence, the cold air sharp with the scent of wet pine from the bordering woods, boots crunching gravel under the sodium lamps. No longer shadowed by sidelong jabs, the paths felt less burdensome, the beacon's silhouette a reminder of patrols past. Hellman's dust traded for Hereford's rain, but the core unchanged, competence in silence, honor in restraint. One night, as fog rolled in from the River Wye, Ellis approached during stand-down, his steps deliberate on the path. "Corporal," he said, halting at ease, the words clipped but warm. "The regiment appreciates steadiness. Yours holds." Hale saluted sharply, the contact brief, eyes meeting in mutual understanding. No effusion, just the British understatement that bound them. From that revelation onward, Hale became the quiet legend of Credenhill's signals wing, his presence a subtle anchor amid the drills and inspections. No plaques adorned the block, no tales embellished in the pub. Respect manifested in aligned postures, in the space afforded during formations, in the way Reed now deferred on overwatch rotations. "Your call, Corp. Wind's yours." The base's rigid order endured. The roll calls at dawn, the echo of boots on the drill square, the clipped tones of hierarchy, but it had deepened, infused with the moral courage that Harlan's salute had unearthed. Injustice's echo faded, replaced by institutional regard, the hidden past no longer a burden but a foundation. As winter's edge crept into the air, Hale stood one morning on the observation berm, binoculars scanning the ranges where the squadron trained below. The rain had paused, leaving the ground glistening, the air crisp with promise. He watched without intervention, the quiet dignity of his role affirmed, not through words but in the steady rhythm of service. British discipline, in its essence, thrived on such silences, the honor earned not in acclaim, but in the unyielding posture of those who stood firm, their legacies woven into the very concrete of bases like Credenhill. The wind stirred, carrying the faint crack of rounds, and Hale lowered the glasses, his gaze on the horizon, reserved, internal, enduring. Weeks turned to months at Credenhill, the relentless cycle of training, imprinting itself on the base like the frost patterns that etched the barracks' windows in the deepening winter. The parade square, now often dusted with a thin rime of ice, rang with the crisp snap of boots at morning roll call, the air sharp with the bite of northerly winds sweeping down from the Brecon beacons. Corporal Daniel Hale integrated further into the signal squadron's fabric, his role evolving without announcement, from peripheral observer to understated mentor, his competence a quiet constant amid the hierarchy's unyielding lines. No special duties were assigned, no overt promotions murmured in the sergeant's mess. The regiment's ways demanded restraint, honor accruing through deeds rather than decrees. In the signals block, where the hum of generators underscored the afternoons, Hale's station became a focal point for the subtler exchanges. Private Thorne, once tentative in his navigation pairing, now sought clarification on frequency protocols during kit audits, his questions delivered with a steady gaze and no trace of the earlier wide-eyed surprise. "Corp, on that Helmand net, how'd you mask the burst without losing sync?" The query came one grey midday as snow flurries dusted the window ledges outside, the room warmed by the low glow of desk lamps. Hale demonstrated on the radio rig, his fingers tracing the dials with the precision of muscle memory, explaining in clipped sentences, "Shorten the preamble, layer the encryption, keeps the signal clean under interference." No lecture, just the transfer of knowledge, absorbed by Thorne with a nod that lingered a beat longer than regulation. Reed's transformation mirrored the squadron's broader shift, his banter tempered into purposeful dialogue. During a joint exercise with the reconnaissance troop, simulating overwatch on the perimeter trails, he deferred to Hale's wind calls without prompting, the lance corporal's voice carrying over the net. "Corp's lead, adjust 2 mils right." The correction landed true, the plywood target splintering under controlled fire, earning a terse "well done" from Ellis at debrief. Reed met Hale's eye afterward in the block, his posture at ease but aligned. The mess hall's spilled tray a distant echo. "Learned that from the best," he said quietly, the admission hanging in the oil-scented air. No need for elaboration. Hale acknowledged it with a fractional incline of his head, the scar along his jaw catching the light from the overhead bulb, a silent testament to endurance. The base's routines asserted their influence, weaving the revelation into the everyday without disruption. Mess hall queues moved with the same unhurried order, trays balanced against the chill that seeped through the doors, but the undercurrents had realigned. Baxter and Cole, once quick with jabs, now contributed to group briefings with focused inputs, Baxter sketching grid overlays during planning sessions, Cole handling antenna alignments with newfound meticulousness. Their glances toward Hale held respect, expressed not in words, but in the space they afforded. A cleared workbench during maintenance, an offered mug of cha during stand easy. Shame had receded, transmuted into diligence. The injustice of mockery dissolved in the steady drip of accountability. Sergeant Major Ellis embodied the institutional respect that followed, his oversight sharpening around Hale's contributions. One evening, as the squadron wrapped a long signals relay drill under floodlights that cast long shadows across the wet concrete, Ellis pulled Hale aside near the armory shed. The air smelled of damp earth and exhaust from idling generators, the beacon's peaks invisible in the night. "Your input on that burst rate, solid," Ellis said, voice low against the wind's whistle. "The regiment values men like you. Keep it steady." No praise effusive, just the clipped affirmation of a superior who recognized depth beneath the reserve. Hale saluted crisply, his response even. "Yes, Sergeant Major." The exchange ended there, postures straightening as they parted, the hierarchy intact but enriched by mutual regard. Whispers of Hale's legacy circulated in the quieter moments, in the NAFI during off hours, over mugs of stewed tea amid the clink of glasses, or in the bunkhouse as lights dimmed for the night. "Ghost One," the call sign surfaced in hushed tones, not as myth, but as marker of moral courage. The shot in the mist that not only ended the drill's simulation, but unveiled a past tied to SAS shadows. Privates like Jenkins recounted it to newcomers, their voices subdued. "Saved Harlan's patrol back in the day. Silent work, that. No embellishment, no drama, just the fact, absorbed into Credenhill's lore like the faint scars on the drill square from countless inspections." The tattoo, glimpsed that afternoon in the block, became emblematic, hidden no longer by necessity, but respected in its discretion. Hale's internal world steadied with the passage of time, the knot of endurance unraveling thread by thread. His walks along the perimeter grew longer, the crunch of gravel under boots a rhythm syncing with the base's pulse, the distant call of a sergeant on the ranges, the low thrum of a helicopter lifting off from the helipad. One crisp dawn, as hoarfrost silvered the fence wire, he paused at the observation berm. Binoculars idle in his hands, gazing toward the ranges where the squadron drilled below. The cold air filled his lungs, sharp and clarifying, carrying the faint echo of rounds cracking in the valley. Reed's section advanced in bounds, their movements tighter, more assured, a legacy of the night's pivot months prior. No public ceremony marked the change. The regiment abhorred excess. Instead, respect manifested in the subtle, a visiting officer from Hereford nodding to Hale during a cross-unit brief, Harlan's influence lingering in the unspoken network. Institutional reform came quietly, Hale's file updated with a commendation for exemplary overwatch, the wording dry, the impact profound. The base's rigid order, with its parade squares and clipped commands, now cradled a deeper honor, the recognition that silence could shield not just operations, but the man behind the rifle. In the end, Daniel Hale remained the quiet professional, his posture unbowed amid Credenhill's rains and winds. British discipline thrived on such restraint, the moral courage to endure injustice, the internal reserve to let competence speak. Silent honor, forged in hidden pasts and public truths, bound the ranks tighter than any order, her legacy enduring in the echo of boots on concrete and the steady gaze toward the horizon. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of Who Took That Shot. See you in the next one.